My parents humiliated me at dinner, saying I would never make it. They laughed while my sister called me a failure. I left that night with nothing but hatred in my veins. Years later, I returned for a visit, introducing myself as the owner of the company they were begging to work for. But that night, 7 years ago, I was just 22-year-old Evelyn Chen, sitting at our family's mahogany dining table while my dreams were being systematically dismantled by the people who were supposed to love me unconditionally. The conversation had started innocuously enough. Mom asking about my job search, Dad inquiring about my post-graduation plans, Victoria smirking from across the table as she always did when family attention focused on my perceived shortcomings. "I've been thinking about starting my own business," I'd said, setting down my fork and trying to project confidence I didn't entirely feel. "I have some ideas about digital marketing strategies that could revolutionize how small businesses reach their customers." The silence that followed felt pregnant with judgment. Mom, Margaret Chen, exchanged one of her loaded glances with Dad, Robert, the kind of wordless communication that had been excluding me from family dynamics since childhood. Victoria, my 25-year-old sister, didn't even bother to hide her eye roll. "Evelyn, sweetheart," Mom began, using the patronizing tone she reserved for conversations about my unrealistic expectations. "Starting a business requires capital, connections, and experience. You have none of those things." "I have ideas," I'd protested, though my voice sounded weaker than I'd intended. "I've been studying successful digital marketing campaigns, and I understand social media algorithms better than most people in the industry. There's a real opportunity here." Dad laughed, not the warm, encouraging laugh of a father supporting his daughter's ambitions, but the dismissive chuckle of someone who'd heard an amusing joke. "Ideas are worthless without execution, Evelyn. The business world is full of people with big dreams and no practical skills to achieve them." "You don't even have a real degree," Victoria added, apparently unable to resist joining the conversation now that blood was in the water. "Art and communications? That's not exactly preparation for running a company." The casual cruelty of the statement hit me like a physical blow. I'd chosen my major carefully, combining visual design with communication theory and digital media studies specifically because I'd believed it would give me the skills needed for modern marketing. But my family had always treated my education as an expensive indulgence rather than professional preparation. "Some of the most successful entrepreneurs dropped out of college entirely," I said, trying to defend both my education and my ambitions against their coordinated assault. "Yes, but they had talent," Mom replied with the matter-of-fact brutality that had characterized her parenting style throughout my childhood. "They had natural gifts that compensated for their lack of formal education. You're more of a dreamer than a doer, honey." The phrase "more of a dreamer than a doer" would echo in my mind for years afterward, becoming both a source of pain and eventually motivation. But that night, it felt like a final verdict on my potential, delivered by the jury of people whose opinion mattered most. "She's always been like this," Victoria said, apparently warming to the topic of my personal failings. "Remember when she thought she was going to be a famous artist? Or when she wanted to be a writer? Evelyn doesn't finish things. She gets excited about projects and then loses interest when they require actual work." "That's not true," I said weakly, though even I could hear the lack of conviction in my voice. "Name one thing you've ever completed successfully," Victoria challenged, leaning back in her chair with the satisfied expression of someone who'd just delivered a knockout punch in a debate. I opened my mouth to respond, then closed it again, as I realized I couldn't immediately think of a major project or goal I'd achieved to completion. College graduation, I supposed. But even that had taken me 5 years instead of 4 due to changing majors and taking time off for financial reasons. "The truth is, Evelyn," Dad said, his voice taking on the heavy tone he used for serious family discussions, "you need to be realistic about your limitations. Not everyone is cut out for entrepreneurship. There's no shame in getting a regular job, working your way up through an established company, building a stable life with reasonable expectations." But I don't want a regular job," I'd said, my voice breaking slightly with the effort of maintaining composure while my family systematically destroyed my confidence. "I want to build something meaningful, something that's mine. What you want and what you're capable of achieving are two very different things," Mom replied, with the clinical detachment of a doctor delivering a terminal diagnosis. "We love you, sweetie, but we also know your limitations. You've never shown the drive or focus that successful business owners possess." The conversation continued for another 20 minutes, each family member taking turns explaining why my business aspirations were unrealistic, impractical, and doomed to failure. They cited my past projects that had been abandoned, my tendency toward distraction, my lack of business education, and my insufficient understanding of how the real world operated. "Maybe you could get a job at an advertising agency," Victoria suggested with false helpfulness. "You could learn how real marketing works before you try to do it yourself. Or work in retail management," Dad added. "Customer service experience would teach you about dealing with people and handling money." They were offering me alternatives that felt like consolation prizes, careers that would keep me safely within the bounds of their expectations, rather than allowing me to pursue the ambitious vision that had been growing in my mind throughout college. When I'd finally excused myself from the table, claiming I was tired and wanted to go to bed early, no one tried to stop me or suggest that we continue the conversation with a more supportive tone. They simply nodded and returned to discussing Victoria's successful career in pharmaceutical sales and her recent promotion to regional manager. As I'd packed my belongings that night, listening to the sound of my family's laughter drifting up from the living room, I'd realized that I would never be able to pursue my dreams while remaining connected to people who saw me as fundamentally incapable of success. I'd left before dawn, with 2 suitcases and $800 in savings, carrying nothing but hatred for the people who'd raised me to believe I was destined for mediocrity. The Greyhound bus to San Francisco cost me $67, leaving me with enough money for maybe 2 weeks of survival if I was careful about food and found a place to sleep that didn't require a security deposit. I'd chosen San Francisco, not because I had connections or opportunities waiting there, but because it was 300 miles away from my family and had a reputation as a place where ambitious people could reinvent themselves. The first month was a masterclass in humility and resourcefulness. I slept in a youth hostel for $12 a night until my money ran out, then graduated to spending nights in 24-hour laundromats, coffee shops that stayed open late, and eventually a women's shelter that provided beds for people who could prove they were actively seeking employment. Finding work without an address, a local phone number, or professional references was like trying to solve a puzzle while blindfolded. The jobs I could get were the ones nobody else wanted: cleaning office buildings at night, washing dishes in restaurants, delivering flyers door to door for businesses that paid 2 cents per flyer and didn't ask questions about employment authorization. "You look educated," said Rosa, the woman who managed the shelter where I'd been staying for 3 weeks. "Why are you washing dishes instead of working in an office somewhere?" I'd been asking myself the same question every night as I scrubbed industrial pots with grease that had been baked on for hours. The honest answer was that office jobs required stability I couldn't demonstrate: a permanent address, references from previous employers, clothes appropriate for professional environments, and the kind of confidence that came from believing you belonged in professional spaces. "I'm working on it," I'd replied, which was technically true. I'd been submitting applications for marketing assistant positions, social media coordinator roles, and entry-level positions at advertising agencies, but the responses had been uniformly discouraging. The breakthrough came through necessity rather than opportunity. The restaurant where I'd been washing dishes was struggling with their online presence. They had a website that looked like it had been designed in 1997, and a Facebook page that hadn't been updated in 6 months. Customer reviews were terrible, not because the food was bad, but because people couldn't figure out their hours, their menu, or how to make reservations. "Your website is killing your business," I'd told Manuel, the owner, during my break one evening. "People can't find basic information, and your social media makes it look like you're closed permanently." Manuel had looked at me like I'd spoken in a foreign language. "I don't understand computers," he'd said with the frustrated resignation of someone who'd been told this before. "My nephew set up the website, but he moved to LA and now nobody knows how to change anything." "I could fix it," I'd offered impulsively. "I know how to build websites and manage social media. I could update everything and create a system that's easy for you to maintain. How much would that cost?" I'd done quick calculations in my head, factoring in how much I was making washing dishes versus how much I could potentially charge for freelance marketing work. "Let me do it for free," I'd said. "If it works and your business improves, you can pay me what you think it's worth." Working on Manuel's restaurant website was like scratching an itch I'd been ignoring for months. I spent every free hour redesigning their online presence, creating social media content, implementing online reservation systems, and developing marketing campaigns that actually reached their target customers. Within 6 weeks, their online reviews had improved dramatically. Their reservation book was consistently full, and Manuel was asking me to help him expand to a second location. "You're wasted washing dishes," he'd said, handing me a check for $2,000, more money than I'd made in the previous 3 months combined. "You should be helping other businesses do what you did for me." That night, I'd sat in my tiny shared room at a boarding house I'd finally been able to afford, staring at Manuel's check and realizing that my family had been wrong about everything. I wasn't a dreamer lacking practical skills. I was someone with marketable talents who'd been convinced by people who didn't understand those talents that they were worthless. I'd started reaching out to other small businesses in the neighborhood, offering the same deal I'd given Manuel. "Let me improve your online presence for free, and pay me based on the results you see." Within 3 months, I had 6 clients. Within 6 months, I had 12. Within a year, I was making more money than Victoria had been earning in her pharmaceutical sales job. But the real transformation wasn't financial. It was psychological. Every successful project, every grateful client, every problem I solved with creativity and persistence was proof that my family's assessment of my potential had been fundamentally wrong. I wasn't incapable of finishing things. I just hadn't found the right things to finish. I wasn't lacking in drive. I'd been lacking in confidence and opportunity. "You're different now," Rosa had observed during one of my visits back to the shelter, where I'd started volunteering to teach basic computer skills to other residents. "You move like someone who knows where she's going." She was right. I did know where I was going. I was building something that belonged entirely to me, something that proved my worth through results rather than family opinions. Every day brought new challenges that I was learning to solve, new skills that I was acquiring through necessity, new confidence that came from succeeding despite everyone's expectations. The hatred that had driven me away from my family was transforming into something more powerful and useful, determination to prove them wrong about everything they'd said about my potential. 2 years into my freelance marketing career, I was handling digital strategies for 23 small businesses across San Francisco, working 16-hour days from a cramped studio apartment that doubled as my office and sleeping space. But it was during a routine client meeting that I discovered the idea that would transform me from a successful freelancer into the owner of a multi-million-dollar company. "The problem isn't that we don't understand social media," explained Dr. Sarah Kim, who owned a small dental practice in the Richmond district. "The problem is that we don't have time to manage it consistently. I'm a dentist, not a marketing expert. I need someone who can handle our entire online presence like they're part of our team, but most marketing agencies want to work with bigger clients who can afford their retainer fees." Dr. Kim's frustration echoed conversations I'd been having with dozens of small business owners over the past year. They needed professional marketing support, but they couldn't afford the premium services offered by established agencies. Meanwhile, those agencies were focused on landing corporate clients with massive budgets, leaving an entire market segment underserved. What if there was a service that provided enterprise-level marketing for small business prices? I'd asked, thinking out loud rather than making a formal proposal. "That would be life-changing," Dr. Kim had replied immediately. "I'd pay $500 a month for someone to handle our social media, website updates, online reviews, and basic advertising campaigns. But when I call marketing agencies, they quote me 3 times that amount for half the services." That night, I'd sat in my apartment sketching out a business model that could serve small businesses efficiently enough to be profitable at the prices they could afford. The key was scale and automation. Instead of providing customized strategies for each client, I could develop templates and systems that could be adapted quickly for different businesses, allowing one team member to manage multiple accounts effectively. I'd spent the next 3 months researching market size, developing service packages, and creating the operational systems that would allow my company to deliver professional marketing services at unprecedented price points. The more I researched, the more convinced I became that there was a massive underserved market of small businesses that were being ignored by traditional agencies. You're talking about competing with established marketing firms that have decades of experience and million-dollar clients, my friend Jake had warned when I'd shared my business plan with him. "What makes you think you can succeed where bigger companies haven't?" "Because bigger companies aren't trying to serve this market," I'd replied. "They're focused on landing whale clients who can afford to pay premium prices. I'm targeting the thousands of small businesses that need professional marketing, but can't afford traditional agency fees." The validation came when I'd presented my concept to my existing clients, offering to transition them from individual freelance contracts to my new service model. 18 of my 23 clients had signed up immediately, and word had spread quickly through small business networks about a marketing service that actually understood their budget constraints and delivered results. I'd named the company Thrive Local, reflecting my focus on helping small businesses succeed in their communities. The initial team consisted of me and 2 contractors, a graphic designer and a social media specialist, working out of a shared workspace in the Mission District. Our first-year revenue was $180,000, which felt like winning the lottery after years of financial uncertainty. But what really made Thrive Local special wasn't just our pricing model. It was our genuine understanding of small business challenges. Because I'd lived those challenges myself. I knew what it felt like to pour everything into building something and worry that one bad month could destroy years of work. I understood the psychology of business owners who needed to see concrete results before investing in marketing expenses. "You actually get it," Manuel had said during one of our monthly check-ins, 6 months after I'd transitioned his account to Thrive Local. Most marketing people talk about brand awareness and engagement metrics. You talk about customers walking through the door and money in the register. By our second year, Thrive Local was managing digital marketing for over 200 small businesses, had expanded to Los Angeles and Seattle, and was generating revenue that exceeded my wildest projections from my freelancing days. We'd developed proprietary software that allowed us to manage multiple client accounts efficiently, created training programs that could turn liberal arts graduates into effective digital marketers within 6 weeks, and established partnerships with small business associations throughout the West Coast. The company wasn't just successful. It was proving a point that I'd been trying to make since that humiliating family dinner 4 years earlier. Small business marketing wasn't a niche or a stepping stone to bigger things. It was a massive industry that had been underserved by companies that didn't understand the market's real needs. "You've built something remarkable," said Jennifer Walsh, the venture capital investor who'd started courting Thrive Local when our revenue numbers had attracted attention from acquisition-minded competitors. "Your business model is scalable, your market position is defensible, and your growth trajectory suggests you could dominate this sector nationally." As I'd sat in Jennifer's downtown office, looking out at the San Francisco skyline, and listening to projections about Thrive Local's potential for national expansion, I'd thought about my family's dinner table and their confident predictions about my inevitable failure. They'd been wrong about everything. 4 years after Thrive Local's founding, I was standing in the penthouse office of our new Seattle headquarters, watching the sun set over Elliott Bay while reviewing expansion plans that would take us into 12 new markets by the end of the year. The company had evolved from a scrappy startup into a marketing powerhouse with 847 employees, offices in 8 cities, and annual revenue approaching $50 million. The transformation hadn't happened overnight. Year 3 had brought challenges that nearly broke both me and the company: a data security breach that compromised client information, a lawsuit from a competitor claiming patent infringement, and a cash flow crisis when 2 major clients delayed payments simultaneously. I'd spent sleepless weeks working with crisis management consultants, cybersecurity experts, and legal teams to navigate problems that could have destroyed everything I'd built. "Most entrepreneurs would have sold the company during the crisis," said Marcus Torres, the CFO I'd hired to help manage our rapid growth. "The fact that you chose to fight through it instead of taking an exit shows real commitment to your vision." But selling had never been an option. Not because I was particularly brave, but because Thrive Local represented more than a business venture. It was proof that my family's assessment of my potential had been fundamentally wrong. Every challenge overcome, every milestone achieved, every employee hired was evidence that I was capable of building something significant and lasting. The breakthrough that transformed Thrive Local from a successful regional company into a national industry leader came through our development of artificial intelligence tools that could automate routine marketing tasks while maintaining the personalized approach that small businesses valued. Our AI platform could analyze local market conditions, identify optimal advertising timing, and adjust campaign messaging based on customer response patterns, all while keeping human marketers involved in strategy and relationship management. "This changes everything," explained Dr. Lisa Chen, the machine learning specialist I'd recruited from Google to head our technology development. "You're not just offering small businesses affordable marketing. You're giving them access to technology that most Fortune 500 companies can't afford to develop internally." The AI platform launch had coincided with a national expansion strategy that leveraged Thrive Local's growing reputation and cash reserves to establish offices in major metropolitan areas across the country. We'd hired local marketing professionals who understood regional business cultures, partnered with small business associations and chambers of commerce, and developed market-specific service packages that addressed local competitive landscapes. "Your growth rate is unprecedented for a service-based company," said Robert Kim, the investment banker who'd started fielding acquisition offers from major advertising conglomerates. "Publicis, WPP, and Omnicom are all interested in purchasing Thrive Local, and the valuations they're suggesting would make you one of the youngest female billionaires in the country." The acquisition offers were flattering but irrelevant. I hadn't built Thrive Local to flip it for a massive payday. I'd built it to prove that ambitious vision combined with relentless execution could create something remarkable, regardless of what anyone's family thought about their potential. But the most satisfying aspect of Thrive Local's success wasn't the financial returns or industry recognition. It was the impact we were having on thousands of small business owners who were achieving growth they'd never thought possible. Our client retention rate exceeded 90%, and the average small business working with Thrive Local saw revenue increases of 37% within their first year of service. "You saved my restaurant," said Elena Vasquez, whose family Mexican restaurant in Phoenix had been struggling before Thrive Local redesigned their digital presence and developed a delivery strategy that tripled their revenue during the pandemic. "My kids thought we'd have to close, but now we're opening a second location." Stories like Elena's had become routine rather than exceptional. Thrive Local's client portfolio included over 3,000 small businesses, dental practices, restaurants, retail stores, professional services, home contractors, and specialty manufacturers, whose success demonstrated that professional marketing expertise could transform local businesses when delivered at accessible price points. The company's rapid growth had also created opportunities for dozens of employees who joined Thrive Local early in their careers and advanced into leadership positions as we'd expanded. Sarah Martinez, who'd started as a social media coordinator in our original San Francisco office, was now managing our entire West Coast operations. David Park, who joined as a junior account manager, was leading our expansion into international markets. "You've built something that changes people's lives," said Jennifer Walsh, the venture capital investor who'd become both a board member and a mentor as Thrive Local had scaled. "Not just your clients' businesses, but your employees' careers. That's the mark of a leader who understands that sustainable success comes from elevating others." As I'd stood in my Seattle office that evening, reading quarterly reports that showed Thrive Local's continued growth across all metrics, I'd realized that my company had become something larger than personal vindication against family criticism. It had become proof that innovative business models could create value for everyone involved: clients who achieved growth, employees who advanced their careers, and communities where small businesses thrived. But there was still one conversation I needed to have, one demonstration of success that would close the circle of proving my family wrong about everything they'd believed about my potential. The first hint of my family's decline came through a LinkedIn notification that Victoria had updated her employment status to seeking new opportunities after her pharmaceutical company had been acquired, and most of the regional sales positions had been eliminated. This was followed by a series of increasingly desperate social media posts about the challenges of job hunting in a competitive market and the unexpected financial pressures of unemployment. I'd been monitoring my family's online presence sporadically over the years, not out of lingering affection, but from curiosity about whether their predictions of my failure had proven more accurate than their assessment of their own stability. Victoria's career, which had been held up as an example of practical success during my humiliating departure, was apparently less secure than they'd assumed. The deeper investigation came through a private investigator I'd hired to compile background information on my family's current situation. I'd told myself this was necessary business intelligence. If I was going to return home for the confrontation I'd been planning, I needed to understand the dynamics I'd be walking into. What Marcus Thompson, the investigator, discovered was a family in free fall. Dad's small accounting firm had been struggling for years as automated tax software had eliminated much of his client base. His attempts to modernize and compete with online services had been expensive failures, leaving him with substantial debt and a business worth less than what he owed on office equipment and software licenses. "Robert Chen has been behind on his office rent for 6 months," Marcus had reported during our meeting in his downtown Portland office. "The landlord has filed eviction papers, and there are liens against his business assets from software companies and equipment lenders." Mom's situation was equally precarious. Her part-time position at a local insurance agency had been eliminated when the company consolidated offices, and at 58, she was discovering that the job market for administrative workers without advanced degrees or technical skills was virtually non-existent. Margaret Chen has been applying for positions ranging from receptionist to retail associate, Marcus continued, consulting his detailed report. She's been unemployed for 8 months and has apparently exhausted her unemployment benefits. But Victoria's situation was the most dramatic reversal. Her pharmaceutical sales career, which had provided her with a comfortable lifestyle and the confidence to mock my ambitions, had ended abruptly when her company's entire sales force had been replaced with a digital platform and automated customer service systems. Victoria Chen has been unemployed for 14 months, Marcus reported. She's applied for positions with several companies, but pharmaceutical sales experience doesn't translate easily to other industries, and her salary expectations seem to be significantly higher than what employers are offering. The family home, which had been the setting for my humiliation 7 years earlier, was now at risk of foreclosure. Mom and Dad had taken out a home equity loan during Victoria's successful career years, apparently assuming their financial stability was permanent. With both parents unemployed and Victoria unable to contribute to household expenses, they were 3 months behind on mortgage payments. They've listed the house for sale, Marcus continued, but the asking price is unrealistic given current market conditions and the home's maintenance issues. Real estate agents have suggested they reduce the price significantly or consider a short sale to avoid foreclosure. But the most telling detail was their recent job applications. All 3 family members had applied for positions with companies that were, unbeknownst to them, Thrive local clients. Dad had applied for an accounting position with a small business in their area that used our financial services marketing. Mom had applied for an administrative position with a dental practice that we'd helped expand into multiple locations. Victoria had applied for a marketing coordinator position with a local real estate agency that we'd transformed from a struggling startup into the area's leading brokerage. They're all seeking employment with businesses that your company has helped make successful, Marcus had observed with the dry humor that made him an effective investigator. It's ironic that they're now dependent on the success of the business model they dismissed as unrealistic. The irony was more profound than Marcus realized. Thrive Local hadn't just become successful in spite of my family's lack of faith. Our success had actually contributed to their decline by helping local businesses become more efficient and competitive, eliminating the demand for exactly the kind of traditional services my family had always provided. Dad's accounting clients had switched to businesses that used our automated financial marketing tools. Mom's insurance agency had lost customers to brokers who used our digital lead generation systems. Victoria's pharmaceutical sales territory had been rendered obsolete by companies that had adopted our healthcare marketing strategies. There's one more thing, Marcus had said, pulling out a final document. They've all applied for positions with Thrive Local directly. Your father applied for a senior accounting position in your Portland office. Your mother applied for an administrative coordinator role. Your sister applied for a regional sales manager position. The applications had been submitted through our standard online portal, with no indication that they were aware of my connection to the company. They were seeking employment with the business I'd built after they'd convinced me I was incapable of building anything successful. As I'd reviewed Marcus's comprehensive report on my family's circumstances, I'd realized that their situation provided an opportunity for the confrontation I'd been planning, not as a vindictive gesture, but as a demonstration of how wrong they'd been about my potential, and how right I'd been about the market opportunities they'd dismissed. They needed jobs. I owned a company. The conversation we were going to have would settle every question about capability and potential that had been raised during that humiliating dinner 7 years earlier. The decision to return home wasn't motivated by forgiveness or family loyalty. It was driven by a need for closure that had been building for 7 years. Every success Thrive Local achieved, every industry award we won, every milestone we celebrated felt incomplete without the final confrontation that would force my family to acknowledge how fundamentally wrong they'd been about my potential. You don't owe them anything, said Dr. Patricia Moore, the executive coach I'd been working with to manage the psychological pressures of rapid business growth. Sometimes the healthiest response to family dysfunction is permanent distance, rather than dramatic confrontation. But the need for vindication wasn't about owing my family anything. It was about proving to myself that their assessment of my capabilities had been not just wrong, but absurdly, catastrophically wrong. I wanted to look them in the eye while they realized that the daughter they'd dismissed as a dreamer had become more successful than they'd ever imagined possible. The trigger for my return came through the Portland office manager, who'd flagged the employment applications from my family members as potentially problematic, due to their local addresses matching my emergency contact information. These might be relatives trying to gain access to company information, Amanda Stevens had written in her report. All 3 applicants share your last name and list addresses in the same neighborhood where you grew up. Should I flag these applications for security review? Reading Amanda's message, I'd realized that fate had provided the perfect opportunity for the confrontation I'd been planning. Instead of arriving home as a vindictive daughter seeking psychological revenge, I could return as a potential employer, reviewing job applications from desperate candidates who happened to be my family. I'll handle the Portland applications personally, I'd responded to Amanda. Schedule interviews with all 3 candidates for next week. Don't mention my involvement. Just say that senior management will be conducting final interviews for these positions. The week between scheduling the interviews and returning to Portland had been filled with meticulous preparation. I'd worked with our HR department to develop legitimate interview questions that would assess my family's qualifications for the positions they'd applied for. I'd reviewed their resumes and employment histories to understand how their careers had evolved since my departure. I'd planned every aspect of the encounter to maximize the impact of the revelation. "Are you sure this is how you want to handle this?" asked Marcus Torres, the CFO who'd become one of my closest advisors. "Family confrontations can be unpredictable, and you're putting Thrive Local's reputation at risk if this situation becomes public or legally complicated." "The interviews will be completely professional," I'd assured him. "I'm not planning to humiliate anyone or create a scene. I just want them to understand who I've become and what I've accomplished since they decided I was incapable of success." But privately, I'd been looking forward to the moment when my family would realize that their financial desperation had led them to beg for employment from the daughter they'd driven away with their cruelty and contempt. The poetic justice was too perfect to resist. The flight to Portland felt like traveling backward through time, retracing the journey I'd made 7 years earlier when I'd fled my family's house with nothing but anger and determination. But this time, I was traveling first class, wearing a custom-tailored business suit and carrying business cards that identified me as the founder and CEO of a company they desperately needed to employ them. "Welcome back to Portland," said the driver, who'd picked me up at the airport in a Tesla Model S that cost more than my family's annual household income during my childhood. "First time visiting our city?" "I grew up here," I'd replied, watching familiar landmarks pass by the window as we drove toward the downtown hotel where I'd be staying during my visit. "I'm back for some family business." The hotel suite overlooked the same neighborhood where I'd grown up, providing a view of streets I'd walked as a child while dreaming about escaping to somewhere that would appreciate my ambitions. From my windows, I could see the house where my family had dismissed my business plans as unrealistic fantasies, the same house they were now at risk of losing to foreclosure. "Tomorrow's interviews are confirmed," Amanda had texted from the Portland office. "All 3 candidates will be arriving at our office for their final interviews. Should I prepare the standard new hire paperwork in case any of them are suitable for immediate employment?" "Prepare the paperwork," I'd responded, "but don't make any hiring decisions until I've had a chance to personally evaluate each candidate's qualifications and cultural fit with our company values." As I'd sat in my hotel suite that evening, reviewing my family's employment applications one final time, I'd realized that the interviews would serve 2 purposes. They would provide the professional evaluation Thrive Local needed to make informed hiring decisions, and they would give me the opportunity to demonstrate how successful I'd become despite their predictions of failure. The little girl they'd humiliated at the dinner table 7 years earlier was gone. In her place was a woman who owned a company they needed, who controlled opportunities they desperately wanted, and who would finally have the chance to show them exactly how wrong they'd been about everything. The Thrive Local Portland office occupied the top 2 floors of a gleaming downtown building, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Willamette River and an open-concept workspace that radiated success and innovation. I'd arrived early to prepare the conference room where I'd be conducting interviews, wanting everything to be perfect for the conversations that would finally settle 7 years of psychological debt. Dad was scheduled first at 9 a.m., applying for our senior accounting position with a resume that documented his struggle to maintain relevance in an increasingly automated industry. I'd positioned myself in the conference room with my back to the door, reviewing financial reports that showed Thrive Local's quarterly performance, so that he'd have time to enter and sit down before seeing my face. "Mr. Chen," I said without looking up when I heard him enter, "please have a seat. I'll be with you in just a moment." I could hear him settling into the chair across from me, probably nervous about the interview that could save his failing business and prevent the loss of the family home. When I finally looked up and met his eyes, the shock on his face was so profound that for a moment I thought he might faint. "Hello, Dad," I said calmly, setting down the financial reports and folding my hands on the conference table. "Thank you for your interest in joining Thrive Local's accounting team." Robert Chen, the man who'd laughed at my business aspirations and predicted my inevitable failure, sat frozen in his chair, staring at me as if I were a ghost materialized from his worst nightmares. His mouth opened and closed several times without producing sound, and I could see him struggling to process the reality that his unemployed daughter had somehow become the executive interviewing him for a job he desperately needed. "Evelyn," he finally managed to whisper, "what are you doing here?" "I'm conducting your interview for the senior accounting position," I replied, maintaining the professional tone I'd practiced for this moment. "You submitted an impressive resume, and we're always interested in candidates with extensive experience in small business financial management. But how? I don't understand." "Thrive Local is my company, Dad. I founded it 5 years ago, and we've grown to become one of the leading small business marketing firms on the West Coast. We currently employ over 800 people and generate annual revenue approaching $50 million. The numbers hit him like physical blows, each statistic contradicting everything he'd believed about my potential when he'd dismissed my business plans as unrealistic fantasies. I could see him doing mental calculations, trying to reconcile the daughter he'd labeled a dreamer with the CEO sitting across from him in an expensive suit, conducting interviews in a corporate office that radiated success. "I want to discuss your qualifications for our accounting position," I continued, opening the folder containing his application materials. "Your resume shows extensive experience with small business clients, which aligns well with our corporate needs. However, I notice that your recent work history shows some gaps and business difficulties." "Evelyn, please," Dad said, his voice cracking with an emotion I couldn't identify. Shame, desperation, or possibly the first stirrings of recognition that he'd been catastrophically wrong about my capabilities. "Can we talk about this as family instead of this formal interview situation?" "This is a formal interview, Mr. Chen," I replied, using his surname with deliberate distance. "Thrive Local has specific hiring needs, and I'm here to determine whether your qualifications meet our requirements. Your family relationship to our CEO doesn't influence our employment decisions." I spent the next 20 minutes conducting a genuinely professional interview, asking about his experience with small business accounting, his familiarity with modern financial software, and his understanding of digital marketing's impact on business financial planning. His answers revealed that his skills were outdated, his software knowledge was limited, and his understanding of contemporary business models was minimal. "Do you have any questions about Thrive Local or the position you're applying for?" I asked, as the interview concluded. "How did this happen?" he asked, apparently unable to focus on job-related questions while processing the revelation that his supposedly incapable daughter had built a successful company. When did you? "I started Thrive Local 18 months after leaving home," I replied matter-of-factly. "I identified an underserved market segment, developed an innovative service delivery model, and built the business through careful planning and consistent execution. Exactly the approach you said I was incapable of when you laughed at my business plans." Dad's face had gone white, and I could see him remembering the dinner conversation where he'd confidently predicted my failure based on his assessment of my limitations. "We'll be making hiring decisions within the next week," I said, standing to signal the end of the interview. "HR will contact you about our decision regarding your application." As Dad left the conference room, moving like a man who'd just learned that everything he'd believed about reality was fundamentally incorrect, I'd felt a satisfaction that was deeper and more complete than any business success I'd achieved. The daughter he'd dismissed as a dreamer was now the CEO he needed to employ him. Mom arrived for her 11 a.m. interview looking like she'd been crying, though whether from stress about the job application or shock from Dad's phone call about my identity wasn't immediately clear. Margaret Chen, who'd once told me that my business dreams were unrealistic because I lacked practical skills, now needed those same impractical dreams to provide her with employment. "Evelyn, sweetheart," she began before even sitting down, abandoning any pretense of treating this as a professional interview. "Your father told me about this company being yours. I don't understand how this happened, but I need you to know how proud we are of what you've accomplished." The sudden claim of pride felt like psychological whiplash from the woman who'd spent years undermining my confidence and dismissing my aspirations. I'd been expecting shock, shame, maybe even anger, but this desperate attempt to rewrite history caught me off guard. "Mrs. Chen," I said, maintaining professional distance, I'm here to discuss your qualifications for our administrative coordinator position. Your emotional relationship to our CEO isn't relevant to the hiring decision. But I'm your mother, she said, apparently confused by my refusal to acknowledge our family connection in a professional context. Surely we can discuss the situation openly instead of pretending we're strangers. We are discussing it openly, I replied, opening her application file. You applied for employment with Thrive Local, and I'm conducting your interview to assess your qualifications for the position. Your resume shows administrative experience, but there are significant gaps in your recent employment history. Mom's interview revealed the same outdated skills and limited technical knowledge that had made Dad's application problematic. Her experience was with manual filing systems, paper-based communication, and office procedures that had been obsolete for years. She'd never used project management software, had minimal social media experience, and didn't understand the digital tools that were essential for modern administrative work. I'm a quick learner, she insisted, when I'd asked about her familiarity with the software systems Thrive Local used for client management. I've always been good with people and organization. Technical skills can be taught, but work ethic and reliability are character traits. Character traits, I repeated, letting the phrase hang in the air while I remembered all the times she'd questioned my character when I'd tried to pursue my business ambitions. Evelyn, please, she said, apparently recognizing the reference. I know we didn't always handle things perfectly when you were younger, but we love you, and we want to support your success now that we understand what you've accomplished. The claim that they wanted to support my success, now that it was undeniably real and potentially beneficial to them, perfectly captured the conditional nature of their family loyalty. They'd been unable to support my dreams when I'd needed encouragement, but they were eager to support my achievements when they needed employment. Victoria's 2 p.m. interview was the most dramatic of the three. She arrived wearing a designer interview outfit that she probably couldn't afford, carrying herself with the confidence that had once made her mockery so devastating. But when she saw me sitting in the conference room, her composure cracked completely. "Oh my God," she whispered, sinking into the chair across from me. "Evelyn, what the hell is happening here?" "I'm interviewing you for our regional sales manager position," I replied. "You have an impressive background in pharmaceutical sales, but I'm curious about how those skills would translate to small business marketing services." "Stop playing games," Victoria said, her shock quickly transforming into anger. "This is insane. How did you build a company like this? When did this happen? Why didn't you tell us?" "Why would I tell you?" I asked, genuinely curious about her reasoning. "The last conversation we had about my business potential. You called me a failure who never finished anything. You specifically said I didn't have the drive or focus that successful business owners possess." Victoria stared at me for several minutes, apparently trying to reconcile the sister she'd dismissed with the CEO conducting her job interview in a corporate office that represented the exact kind of success she'd claimed I was incapable of achieving. "I was wrong," she said finally, her voice smaller than I'd ever heard it. "Obviously, I was completely wrong about your potential. But Evelyn, we're family. We made mistakes, but that doesn't mean we can't fix our relationship now." "This isn't about fixing our relationship," I replied. "This is a job interview. You applied for a position with Thrive Local, and I'm evaluating whether your qualifications meet our requirements." The interview revealed that Victoria's sales experience was entirely irrelevant to our business model. She'd been selling established pharmaceutical products to medical professionals who understood the product's benefits. Thrive Local required sales professionals who could educate small business owners about digital marketing concepts and build long-term service relationships. "I can learn," she insisted, when I'd explained the differences between her experience and our needs. "I've always been good at sales, and I understand how to build relationships with clients." "Do you?" I asked, reviewing the notes I'd been taking throughout her interview. "Because your approach to our family relationship suggests you have difficulty maintaining connections when they don't provide immediate benefits to you." All 3 interviews had followed the same pattern. Initial shock at discovering my identity, desperate attempts to reframe our family history in more positive terms, and increasingly frantic pleas for employment that revealed how completely their financial situation had deteriorated. But what struck me most was their inability to offer genuine apologies for their past behavior. Instead of acknowledging the cruelty of their dismissal and taking responsibility for driving me away, they'd focused on minimizing their mistakes and emphasizing their current need for my help. They wanted employment from the company they'd claimed I could never build, but they weren't willing to acknowledge that their assessment of my potential had been not just wrong, but devastatingly harmful to someone they claimed to love. The revelation came during what I'd planned as the final confrontation, a family dinner I'd arranged at an expensive restaurant downtown, where I intended to lay out my terms for their potential employment and force them to acknowledge how wrong they'd been about my capabilities. But 30 minutes into the meal, Mom made a confession that shattered everything I thought I understood about my childhood and their treatment of me. "Evelyn, there's something we need to tell you," Mom said, her voice shaking as she set down her wine glass. "Something about why we were so hard on you about your business dreams. We were sitting in a private dining room at Portland's most exclusive restaurant, surrounded by the kind of luxury that my success had made routine, but that my family clearly found intimidating. Dad and Victoria had spent the first half hour asking questions about Thrive Local's growth and marveling at details about my business success, apparently still struggling to reconcile the daughter they'd dismissed with the CEO, who now controlled opportunities they desperately needed. "What do you mean? Why you were hard on me?" I asked, though something in Mom's tone made me suspect this conversation was about to take a direction I hadn't anticipated. We never intended to discourage you," Dad said, apparently joining Mom in whatever revelation they'd planned. "We were trying to protect you from something we thought might be genetic. The word hung in the air like smoke from a fire that was about to consume everything I thought I knew about my family and myself. "Evelyn, your grandfather, my father, was an entrepreneur," Mom continued, her voice gaining strength as she committed to the disclosure. "He built several businesses throughout his life, and they all failed spectacularly. Each failure destroyed our family financially and emotionally. I'd heard almost nothing about my grandfather throughout my childhood, only vague references to someone who'd died before I was born and hadn't left much of an inheritance for the family. He wasn't just unsuccessful," Dad added, apparently taking over the story. "He was obsessed with business ventures, to the point where he neglected his family, spent money we didn't have on schemes that never worked, and put us through years of financial instability and emotional chaos." Mom pulled out her phone and showed me photographs I'd never seen. Images of my grandfather standing beside various business ventures that all looked like the kind of ambitious projects that required significant investment and generated uncertain returns. "He opened restaurants that failed within 6 months," Mom continued, scrolling through the photos. "He invested in real estate developments that never got built. He started a manufacturing company that went bankrupt within 2 years. Every time he convinced himself that this venture would be different, that this time he'd found the key to success. And every time, we lost everything," Dad said, his voice heavy with memories that explained decades of his conservative approach to money and career choices. "Our house, our savings, our security. We spent my childhood moving from apartment to apartment, changing schools, living with relatives when his latest business venture collapsed." The pattern they were describing, ambitious business plans, confident predictions of success, repeated failures that devastated the family, sounded like a cautionary tale designed to explain their reaction to my own entrepreneurial ambitions. "When you started talking about building your own company," Mom said, her voice breaking slightly, "all we could see was history repeating itself. We thought you'd inherited his compulsive need to chase business dreams, regardless of the consequences. So you decided to crush my confidence before I could fail?" I asked, finally understanding why their response to my business plans had been so brutal and immediate. "We thought we were protecting you from the kind of devastating disappointment he experienced over and over," Dad replied. "We thought if we could convince you to choose a stable career path, you'd avoid the cycle of failure that destroyed his life and damaged our entire family." Victoria had been silent throughout this revelation, but now she spoke up with a voice that carried genuine remorse. "We were all traumatized by growing up with his constant business failures," she said. "When you started talking about entrepreneurship, it felt like watching someone walk toward a cliff that we knew would destroy them." The psychological complexity of their motivation was staggering. They hadn't been cruel because they didn't believe in me. They'd been cruel because they'd believed too strongly in the genetic inevitability of my failure based on my grandfather's pattern of unsuccessful ventures. "But what you built is nothing like his businesses," Mom continued, apparently recognizing the fundamental difference between my approach and her father's methods. "Thrive Local is successful, stable, profitable. You've achieved everything he dreamed about, but never accomplished. You proved that entrepreneurship could work when it's approached with real planning and market understanding," Dad added, You succeeded where he failed because you have skills and knowledge he never developed. The revelation reframed every cruel comment, every dismissive laugh, every prediction of failure as attempts to protect me from what they genuinely believed was an inherited tendency toward self-destructive business ventures. They'd been wrong about my potential, but they'd been wrong from love rather than malice. "Why didn't you tell me this 7 years ago?" I asked, trying to understand how this information might have changed our relationship if I'd known their motivation for discouraging my business plans. "Because we didn't want you to know about his failures," Mom replied. "We thought if you understood the family history of business disasters, you might be even more determined to prove you could succeed where he couldn't." They'd been right about that too. 6 months later, I was sitting in my Portland office. Thrive Local had opened a permanent headquarters in my hometown, partly for business expansion, and partly because I'd discovered I wanted to rebuild my relationship with my family, but on new terms that reflected who I'd become, rather than who they'd expected me to remain. The employment situation had been resolved with careful consideration for both business needs and family dynamics. Dad had been hired for a senior accounting position, but only after completing additional training in modern financial software and digital business practices. His experience with small business finances, once updated with current methodologies, had proven valuable for helping our clients navigate complex financial decisions. Mom had not been hired for the administrative coordinator position. Her skills were too outdated for our fast-paced environment, but I'd connected her with one of our client businesses that needed part-time bookkeeping help and was willing to provide training in modern office systems. The work paid well enough to help stabilize her finances while allowing her to develop relevant skills gradually. Victoria's situation had been more complex. Her pharmaceutical sales experience wasn't directly relevant to our business model, but her communication skills and professional presentation had impressed our HR team. We'd hired her for a client services role that allowed her to use her relationship-building abilities while learning about digital marketing from experienced team members. "This feels different than I expected," Victoria had said during one of our monthly check-ins, 3 months after starting her position. "I thought working for my sister's company would be awkward, but you've been completely professional about everything." The professional boundaries I'd maintained had been essential for rebuilding our relationships on healthier foundations. They were no longer the family members who'd dismissed my potential. They were employees who'd earned their positions through qualifications and who maintained their jobs through performance rather than family connection. But the most significant change had been in how we discussed the past and planned for the future. Understanding their psychological motivation for discouraging my business plans had allowed me to forgive their cruelty while still maintaining accountability for its impact. "We should have told you about your grandfather from the beginning," Dad had said during one of our family dinners, now monthly events held at restaurants rather than in the house where I'd been humiliated years earlier. "Even if we were afraid of encouraging what we thought were dangerous tendencies, you deserve to understand why we were reacting so strongly to your business plans. And we should have recognized that your approach was completely different from his," Mom had added. "You did market research. You developed realistic financial projections. You understood your target customers. He just threw money at ideas and hoped they'd work." The family business we'd inadvertently created through their employment at Thrive Local had become a source of healing rather than continued dysfunction. Working together in professional roles had allowed us to rebuild trust while maintaining the boundaries that prevented regression into old patterns of disrespect and discouragement. "I'm proud of what you've built," Victoria had said during our most recent conversation. "Not just the company, but the way you've handled our family situation. You could have used your success to punish us for how we treated you, but instead, you've used it to create opportunities for everyone to grow." The growth had been mutual. Managing family members as employees had taught me leadership skills that benefited the entire company. Learning to separate family dynamics from business decisions had made me a more effective CEO. Understanding the psychological complexity of their past behavior had made me more empathetic toward other people, whose actions might be motivated by fears rather than malice. But perhaps most importantly, proving my business capabilities to the family members who doubted them had finally closed the psychological wound that had driven my initial success. I no longer needed to build Thrive Local larger to prove a point about my potential. I could focus on growth that served our clients, our employees, and our communities, rather than growth that satisfied my need for vindication. "Do you think Grandfather would be proud of what you've accomplished?" Mom had asked during our last family dinner, showing me more photographs of his failed business ventures that I'd been studying to understand both his mistakes and his ambitions. I think he'd be proud that someone in the family finally figured out how to make entrepreneurship work, I'd replied. But I also think he'd understand that success requires more than just ambition and determination. It requires market knowledge, financial discipline, and the ability to learn from other people's mistakes. Thrive Local continued to grow, now serving over 5,000 small businesses across 12 states and employing nearly 1,000 people whose careers had been built on the foundation of helping other entrepreneurs achieve sustainable success. But the most meaningful measure of success wasn't revenue or market share. It was the fact that my family now understood and respected what I'd built, and that understanding had transformed our relationships from sources of pain into sources of mutual support and professional collaboration. The daughter they'd dismissed as a dreamer had become the CEO who employed them, but more importantly, she'd become someone who could forgive without forgetting, who could succeed without seeking revenge, and who could build a business that created value for everyone it touched. The hatred that had driven me away from home had been transformed into love that brought me back, but on terms that honored both my achievements and their growth into people who could finally see my potential clearly.